Welcome back. In this video, we're going to create a confidence interval for the proportion of houses that have a fireplace. And to do that, we're going to need some information. First of all, make sure you've got the house prices file started. And I'm actually going to do a couple of housekeeping things, which are always good practice. I'm going to call this version 8. And of course, these completed files will be made available to you. And the other thing I'm going to do is go back to my freeze panes. Now I can scroll down and see what's going on. First thing I need is, how many fireplaces, how many houses have fireplaces. So what I'm going to do is use a function called COUNTIF. So I go to Formulas, Insert Function, and I go down to Statistical, and I find COUNTIF. And I need a range and a criteria. The range is going to be H2 to H40, and the criteria is going to be yes. And that tells me that there are 26 houses that have fireplaces. Now I need to know the total sample size. And there I can use another one. I'll just type this one out. It's called Count A. And what this will do is it'll count all the alphanumeric, all the cells that have an alphanumeric value, also H2 to H40. That's not quite right. Not HH40. And we make mistakes, and sometimes it's good to see the mistakes happen. So all I did was change that to count A, H2 to H40. And then, of course, I could calculate, although it's not critical here, a sample proportion. I just take the total number of houses with fireplaces over the total number of houses in the sample, and that is just about 2/3. So now I'm going to go and add a new tab. And in this new tab, I'll make it bigger so you can see a little bit better. I'm going to make column A a little bit wider. And let's do the following. First, I'm going to have a section called Inputs Needed. And oh, what the heck, I'll underline that. And the inserts needed are the positive responses, in this case, houses with a fireplace, which I just pick up the number that we calculated from the other tab. So you can kind of jump back and forth to see what you've got there. Then I need the sample size N, which we know is 39. And then I need a level of confidence. Let's choose 90% for this one. That's all I need. Try using 90% to give you something different. Now, most of the values from here on in will be calculated. So I'm going to list them as calculated Z value for our critical value that will tell us how many standard deviations above and beyond the sample proportion that I need. So I go in and I'm going to use a command called, this one's a little tricky, insert that formula insert function. It's still statistical. And the command I want is get down there norm.s for standardized, .inverse for inverse. And I just need a probability. The tricky thing here is that the probability is going to be 1/2 of the alpha. So you see that I've got that level of confidence there. So let's see how I will enter that. That probability is going to be 1 minus B4 divided by 2. Now, if you note over here, it tells me it's giving me a negative number. because it's giving me the lower tail for a 90% value. So I'm just going to fix that here. I'm going to actually open it. I'm going to fix that here by just putting a negative in front of it. And I will copy that formula to the cell to the right so you can see it if you're reviewing this later. It's also good for practice. So the calculated z value will be 1.644845, but we can just use that number. Then I'm going to calculate calculated sample proportion. We did that already, but you can do it again. That's simply going to be the positive response is number of houses with a fireplace over the total number of houses. We know that that's just about that's exactly 2/3. And we'll put that formula in. Okay. Now this is another tricky one. So remember that complicated formula where we had p times 1 minus p over n all under the square root sign? Well, that's the standard error. So that's going to be the calculated standard error for this problem. And we'll just use a formula where that's going to be equal to parentheses b8 times the inverse parentheses 1 minus b8 close parentheses divided by our sample size in b3, close the other parentheses, and raise that all to the 1/2 power, which will take the square root for us. So there's our sample, our calculated standard error. Now all that's left is to determine the lower limit for the interval, which is going to be equal to the sample proportion plus the calculated z-value times the standard error. Looks like I made a mistake. Again, sometimes it's good to just show that. I should not have added, I should have subtracted b8 minus b6 times b10. And I knew that because my value was higher than the sample portion. And let me go back and make sure that I'm showing you these formulas in column C. Again, when you look at it a second time or when you go to try this, having those formulas there will be of great help, or should be of great help. Okay, we've got the lower limit. Now we'll calculate the upper limit for the interval. And that one's going to be our sample proportion plus our calculated z-value times our standard error. And there's the number we saw before. And there's the formula. And then we've got everything we need, except that I'd like this to look a little bit better. So I'm going to rewrite this and also provide a written interpretation. I'm going to start with the lower limit, which I'm going to reformat to be in percentage with 1 decimal, and how I like it. Then in the next cell, I want to put in less than or equal to pi with another less than or equal to. And well, I could type in the word pi, or again, this isn't critical, this is just a label. I can insert a symbol over here and find the pi symbol by Find the pi symbol. What happened to my pi symbol? Well, tell you what, we'll just type in pi and perhaps we'll fix it later. And then we'll have our upper limit, and we will use the format painter for the upper limit. And we will center that so it looks balanced. So now what we have is I am 90% confident that the true population proportion of houses that have a fireplace is between 54.3% and 79.1%. And you now have a handy tool that you could use to calculate confidence intervals like this. Again, software can do a lot of this for you. And we're using the normal approximation to the binomial, but this is the best way I feel for understanding.